We are live.
Senate Appropriations, May 13th, and we're going through bills. We have at first H931, the miscellaneous ed bill. And we have Legislative Council of Washington.
Good afternoon, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. So on your website, you have H931, which is this year's miscellaneous bill. Sometimes they go back and forth. This year, there's only one education bill. On your website, you have draft 4.1, which is what was voted out of Senate Education. But I also have a side-by-side and a section-by-section summary. And I don't know how much time you want to spend on this bill or where you want to focus. So I didn't send anything.
There's no fiscal note. There is no failure. It's serious way. Okay.
Do you want to just focus on the sections where there could be a fiscal impact? Okay.
Yeah, I assume as a miscellaneous ed bill, there's a bunch of small changes and corrections that aren't really financially.
I think that's accurate. So let me share my screen just to the Senate Education's report. So they did a strike all amendment to the House bill. And I'll just note what didn't change. So section 1, which is an amendment to the moratorium on approval of new independent schools, did not change. They kept that. They did not make any changes from the House version.
And what is the House do on that? Just
currently there is a moratorium on the approval of new approved independent schools.
right.
The House created an exception, essentially. They don't use the word exception, but it's an exception for approved independent schools that are also therapeutic independent schools that have a change in ownership. And therefore that change in ownership is triggering an initial application.
Okay.
And the state board would be unable to process that initial application because of the moratorium.
But just the new therapeutic school would be able to.
Correct. It's just a change of ownership of someone who's already been approved. Any more detail on that? Okay. Section 2 is Vermont readopting the Interstate Compact for Education. We were members of this compact through the mid-90s and we withdrew. I do not know why. But we have since withdrawal been sending commission members and paying dues sporadically.
This isn't the higher education compact. No. That's a different one.
The Interstate Compact for Education. I think the purpose section here is the most helpful to kind of summarize. Establish and maintain close cooperation and understanding among executive, legislative, professional education, and educational and lay leadership on a nationwide basis at the state and local levels. Provide the forum for discussion, develop personalization and recommendation of public policy alternatives in the field of education. This is when you get the Education Commission of the States to come in and give you a report on statistics. That's this.
Okay.
We are one of, I believe, 2 states who are not currently members. I believe the other one might be Maine.
Oh, we're paying dues?
Sporadically on and off since we withdrew. Yes. And also appointing commissioners. So this is Vermont readopting the compact. The language of the compact that is in existence today has changed almost imperceptibly from what was in place when we withdrew in the 90s.
Is this in the fiscal note? Or is it part of the fiscal note?
As our open joint fiscal office.
You don't have to go through it. You can just say yes. Well, you can, when you go through fiscal note, you can get some.
Yep, it's referenced here.
Okay.
Okay, so section 2 takes up many pages, so avert your eyes. We're gonna go to.
You're looking at the Senate version?
Yes, this is the Senate version. We're gonna jump to page 14, section 3, background checks. This section also came over from the House and Senate Education made no changes. It requires the Agency of Education to conduct a criminal record background check on all.
Oh, they do that now.
Not on their own employees or contractors. So this requires them to conduct a background check on their own employees or contractors. If that employee or contractor will have or has the potential to have unsupervised contact with students. And there are fees associated with this, which are covered in Ezra's fiscal notes. The process for the background, and this was a request that came from the agency, process for the background check is essentially the same process that happens in the field for teachers and superintendents, et cetera.
Yeah, we talked earlier about the cost of that contract.
Mhm.
Trying to information set.
I think Ezra has an estimate for you on the fees and how many folks may be implicated next year.
One central office for everybody to background checks.
Yeah.
Section 4 is just a conforming amendment to go along with the background check requirement in section 3. It's just adding the Agency of Education to the list of employers who need to keep track of the criminal records that they are requesting. Again, that came from the House. That's the last section that came from the House. Everything we're about to walk through next is new from Senate Education. Section 5 on page 17, line 8, is an amendment to the Intercollegiate Sexual Harm Prevention Council. It essentially revamps the membership and also amends their duties. It's a very broad summary.
Yeah, it's fine.
No per diems or anything in there. In fact, that was all struck on lines 13 through 17 on page 21. I believe everyone, let's see.
They don't have to do a report.
No reporting requirement either. So everyone who's now a member is likely going to be serving in their official capacity from their day job.
Hmm.
And then, do you want any more detail on that?
Hmm.
Okay. Section 6 on page 22 is an amendment to the harassment, hazing, and bullying prevention policies statute. This is K through 12. The section 5 was post-secondary. Now we're back in K through 12 or pre-K through 12. Section 6 is only amending the advisory council related to hazing, harassment, and bullying prevention. It doesn't change anything having to do with the policies themselves or the school district's responsibilities. The advisory council membership is also overhauled here, although it's slightly misleading. The subdivisions A through F that are struck on pages 22 and 23 remain members, but because of the way I drafted this, I had to strike them and re-add them back in. So the executive director of the V's and the Human Rights Commission and Visa all remain members. And then there are several new members added to this council. Do you want to go over the membership, or do you just want to know that it increases the cost for dams?
That's it.
Okay. So several new members added. Their duties were fleshed out and changed, and compensation and reimbursement was added. This was not a part of the statute as it originally existed. And so there is a separate appropriation in section 7 on page 26 of $21,000 to AOE for the per diem and reimbursement expenses for the advisory council on harassment, hazing, and bullying prevention.
But there's not anything in the budget for that. Right. So we'd have to. If there's an appropriation of bill that passes, do we have to fund it? Even if it's not in the budget, I have to fund it.
I think you would probably want, if it's not in the budget, you would have to probably strike that. Or do you, Ezra knows way more than I do.
My understanding with speaking with Emily Byrne is that the current budget construct could absorb this 21,000.
Right, I think we left 70,000 at the bottom line, so it could be part of that. So as long as the money's there, that's why you want the budget to be the last bill passed, so you can make sure these things are.
You sort out all the legal strings.
Right. Okay.
Section 8 is an amendment that I was not the lead drafter on, so I bumbled my way through this. It's an amendment to section 3448F which is in your school construction chapter in chapter 123 in Title 16, related to energy performance contracting. And it amends the definition of cost saving measure to include additions.
In addition to the bill.
In addition to the building, yes.
That seems pretty straightforward.
And again, that was added by Senate Education. And then the last section is just the effective date. The entire bill would take effect on July 1, 26.
Right. Any questions for Attorney St. James? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. We will walk us through this code.
Once again, for the record, Dr. Holden, Joint Fiscal Office, would you like me to share my screen or?
If it's easy,
Yes.
we all have screens, but sometimes it's easier to share. You have a screen, it's just small.
All right, so I will just go high level, and then if you have any questions, we can get a little bit more in depth. So as you just heard from that St. James, this bill would introduce several additions and amendments to education law. A few of them would have fiscal impact. And so just go through those sections. So first, as you heard from Bev, this would codify, this bill codified Vermont's membership in the Interstate Compact for Education. Member states pay dues, but Vermont has been paying these dues through the Agency of Education's budget, even though they're not officially a member. So this would actually not be a new expenditure. The AOE already has these dues baked into their budget for fiscal year 2027.
In section 1, you say that the fiscal impact of the change on amending the moratorium on approved independent schools is unclear. What would be the impact of that section or potential fiscal impact?
On section 1?
Yeah.
It's unclear to us. I'm not sure how often that this would or would not take place, this situation, this moratorium.
Do they have to pay a fee to be or something like that, or is it just like the overall impact on the education?
So that I do not know if there is a fee that they have to pay for it with that initial application. And also this would only apply to therapeutic schools who have to resubmit because there's a change in ownership, and we're not sure how often that would or would not
I was just
happen.
wondering if I was missing something about why it would impact at all.
No, I think that's just flagging that it's currently unclear to us if schools or other state entities utilize the therapeutic school and then there was a change in ownership in that. Yeah, just wanted to flag that section's happening, but we're unsure of the impact.
Okay.
So going back to, let's see, section 3. So this would require the AOB to pay criminal record check fees. And so JFO expects that the fees for for employment applicants or contractors at the AOE could be about $47 per applicant in fiscal year 2027. There are two pieces with that. So the first is a up to $35 fingerprinting fee from a law enforcement agency to get the fingerprints from the applicant. And that limit of 35 is set in statute. The other portion is a $12 records retrieval fee, and the FBI sets that fee. And what I believe happens is that VCIC, the Vermont Crime Information Center, essentially receives the fingerprints from the applicant from the law enforcement agency that took those fingerprints. They then use those to retrieve the records from the FBI, and then they would be remitting a fee or a portion of that $12 record check fee to the FBI from, in this case, AOE. So up to 47 per applicant. And based on what we've heard from the agency, about 34 individuals on average would need to have their fingerprints taken, so that would be around $1,600. And new expenditures that would be borne by the agency's budget. And then the last section that I have. Actually, I guess 2 sections. So sections 6 and 7, the advisory council on harassment, hazing, and bullying.
You could move your screen.
Sorry.
Just so,
Yeah, so this would,
you're still on the first.
there we go. It's like buffering a little bit there. Oh.
Yeah. I got it. Sorry.
It's done.
No.
Would you like me to continue or?
I don't know. But if you're all on that clear, but then we can do this one. Is it fuzzy on your screen?
Oh, well, the code is,
Grow up, it's all right. You get down below a certain point.
that is bizarre.
Keep going on. I think it's the bottom of the.
So I have a summary of the sections right there at the bottom.
Yeah.
So we can just go off of that, if that's okay.
Sure.
So this would restructure and expand the membership of the advisory council on hazing, harassment, bullying prevention, as you heard from Dutch Council. So now there would be 17 members, and we expect that about 13 of those members would be eligible for per diems and expense reimbursements, which are added here in 931. So we estimate that those per diems and expense reimbursements will total about $21,000 fiscal year. Per fiscal year, and then section 7 would appropriate 21,000 from the general fund to AOE in fiscal year 2027 for the purpose of those per diems.
Okay.
And then let's see now if it's any better. Oh,
That's okay.
okay. So we did not, it's not here in the summary because it's an undetermined fiscal impact, but just flagging that section 8, which changes the definition of cost saving measure under energy performance contracting. So by adding facility additions to the definition of cost saving measure, this would potentially increase the number of projects which would meet this new definition and which could apply for state aid for school construction program. However, there is no funding source currently for that.
Is it just for energy performance contracting? It just allows them to use it, energy performance contracting for an addition? That's what I understood the change. It seems like. Doesn't necessarily mean they're gonna get state aid for school construction, which there's no money for anyway, so even if it did mean that.
Yeah, my understanding is just that it would add. Under this expansion of the definition, there could be additional activities
Right.
which maybe use this to apply, but
Yeah,
yes, there is no funding for that right now. So without any funding, it's unclear if there were any projects, how they could receive anything, it's no funding.
it could mean that they do energy performance contracting for an addition, but then it would just be part of their overall expenditure. Okay. Any questions? I'd love to talk about energy performance contracting. Yeah. Okay, well, if there's no questions, no comments, no speeches about the miscellaneous ed bill, no references to Sharknadoes, well, we will entertain motion to pass the bill. Okay. If not,
No, that's my recipe.
Okay, no.
Maybe that.
Not all of it.
Did you get anything from me over there? Well, there's an apple strudel pie on. Not all your.
Oh, what's the?
This is dessert.
Dessert.
Apple strudel pie.
Jeez.
Okay, all right. Senator Baru. Hey, came and went.
Senator Brennan, yes. Senator Elias.
Yes.
Senator Norris. Yep. Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yeah.
Senator Birchler.
Yes. So we're assuming this $21,000 for per diems at some point. Oh no, there was another $21,000 for the background checks. That'll be next fiscal year. So, yeah, but AOE, we just kind of have that in the budget anyways. We don't have to. The per diems, we don't necessarily have to have in the budget unless AOE is saying they don't have the money in the budget.
Look for the background checks.
Is that what, is AOE saying they don't have this money in their budget?
I can't, I'm not sure. I can answer that for you.
Like we said, there's money on the bottom line if we need to, because it seems like we don't necessarily have to account for this money in the budget because it's on the potential for per diems. We don't know if people will ask for per diems. Okay. Does the teacher have to report all ed bills that come out of the?
Usually.
Yeah, kind of the rule, yeah, okay.
Try to name it, you don't mind that.
That's good.
Sure, that's fine. Happy to.
Okay. So that is H931. So do we have to wait for Kevin? Yes, you can join us.
Things like that, pass on over, you know, those there.
That's true. Sure, really. Look at the one.
Welcome. You're here to tell us about H567.
Yes, sir. For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. My apologies for not being here yesterday, and thank you for sliding the conversation today.
It worked out good.
While I'm waiting on the internet and potentially trying to pull this bill up, I'll just kind of start to speak to it.
Should we look at the Senate Finance Amendment or?
As passed by House version, there is an amendment that the Senate Finance Committee is proposing, but it's just adding a section at the end of the bill and doesn't change any of the language in the underlying bill that came over from the House. So what you have is the as passed by House version. It's a 36-page document, but makes, I would say, relatively minor and more technical changes to the statute. A lot of the statute is simply, a lot of the bill is deleting language in one section and moving language over into another section, and I'll get into that in just a second. The first few sections are related to unclaimed properties. And primarily what it's doing is it's updating these minimum thresholds by which if the unclaimed property value is less than that amount, then the treasurer's office can do a more of a fast claims process and get the unclaimed property back out to the individual who is claiming it without having to have that individual go through a bunch of, hoops to, validate that the documentation supporting unclaimed property is what it is or is accurate. So what I mean by that, now that I'm in Zoom.
Yeah.
Here we go, page 1. Unclaimed property. First thing, contents of the report. This section is allowing the treasurer's office to accept medical unclaimed property from a medical insurance policy. And then it is authorizing the treasurer's office to ask for and get an explanation of the benefits that are provided under that medical unclaimed property policy, so they can ensure that they understand who the unclaimed property should go to. So just some minor technical changes there to allow them to gather more information. The rest of these sections here, as I mentioned, are updating certain thresholds from the unclaimed property division.
The administrator, the treasurer's office.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, because the administrator, they're the administrator of the unclaimed property division and the unclaimed property monies here. So this section, I think is important. This section 2 and section 3 go together. Because for unclaimed property, so you have to understand that the treasurer's office is required to maintain a certain amount of unclaimed property on hand to be able to pay out the unclaimed property claims. And that's just based on, you know, an average of payout over the past X number of years. So they have to maintain that amount. The rest of it gets transferred over to the general fund on an annual basis. And then there are certain, you know, deductions that the treasurer's office can make from the money that gets transferred over to help cover things in this list, expenses, costs of mailing and publication, service charges, etc. And then if you look at the subdivision 5 here, property that is valued at $100 or less that is more than 10 years old gets transferred over to the Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund on an annual basis. Every year they make that calculation and they take that money and they transfer it over. What this change is doing is instead of depositing that money, first off, it's increasing the threshold from 100 to 150. So now if it's more than 10 years old and it's valued at $150 or less, it won't go to the Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund. Instead, it would be deposited into the Vermont Retirement Security Fund. And that is the fund that the treasurer's office uses to administer the Vermont Saves program.
Is that all it does? Or is that special security fund do a?
The Vermont Retirement Security Fund is only there for the administration of the Vermont Saves program. And so what this change is going to do is it's going to divert that money to the Vermont Saves Admin Fund up to a maximum annual total of $300,000. Then the language here on the top of page 3 says, notwithstanding that, the treasurer may deposit the money into the Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund up to $300,000. So the change is saying that instead of going to the Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund, it must go to the Vermont Saves Admin Fund unless the state treasurer in the state treasurer's sole discretion determines to shift some of that money over to Vermont Higher Education Endowment Fund. My understanding is the purpose of this is to help provide some capital to go into the Vermont Saves Administrative Fund while that program kind of gets up, you know, on its feet. It's only been in existence for 2 years now, I believe so. So this is to help provide them with some capital to get the administration of that program up and running.
They testified about it. That's underlined.
So I'm looking what you have up there and I'm looking what I have here. And it's the,
You're looking at that.
I have as passed by house. And I'm seeing that it says that the retirement fund is, security fund is crossed out. And the endowment trust fund is in.
So this is sunset. This has a sunset in it. When you look on, when you look down here, section 3 at the bottom of that page.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. It is being sunset, January 1 of 2040. This shift of the money to the Vermont Saves Admin Fund would be sunset 2040. Yes, sir. And then it would all divert back to the Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund 5.
All right, thank you.
So
Repeat that again.
So this change that under this bill that would divert the money away from the Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund over to the Vermont Saves Fund,
Yeah.
that is sunset January 1 of 2040. In which case the language would revert back to requiring all of those monies to go to the Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund. It would keep the cap. So keep in mind, you're increasing the threshold from 100 to 150. That would remain. Yeah. Okay.
We won't hear.
And then, but the treasurer has the ability to put money into the higher ed trust fund before.
Yes, sir.
If the states count are really going great, then they can do that.
In my understanding, based on their testimony in other committees, is that the intention would be to slowly shift money to the Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund over the next I think it was 5 years or so, 5 to 7 years. And at that point, they would be diverting all of the money to the Vermont Higher Education Trust Fund anyway. But the sunset itself, the legal requirement is sunsetted in 2040.
So
So I'm gonna ask a question, you're probably not the person to answer it, but in most cases, in all of these, in the administration of a lot of these funds, would go through the normal budgetary process, and this would divert any budgetary process. Why is that a good idea? I didn't think you were, but most of these funds are, and granted, in some of the retirement funds, there's an administrative cost and there isn't, but this is taking money that's not the fees to manage a retirement account and doing that. But this is taking public dollars and you're basically going out around any appropriations process.
So currently, the money gets deposited into the Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund by statute, and I don't know whether that has to go through your annual budget process or not. I'd probably defer that.
But the function that we're doing is not that, and I'm just wondering why it's a good idea not to have the administration of the new savings plan. They come in and say, this is what we need, and you do it.
do you want to hear any from the treasurer's office or?
I think they're gonna get in the chair after noon.
I wasn't, not necessarily. I mean, we heard their proposed, they proposed later, but we could have them answer your
Yep.
question if you want.
Okay.
David, do you want it, or do you want to wait till?
I mean, I have a brief set of slides that I can very quickly provide a full explanation for what we're doing here. I know we testified briefly, but it might be helpful to remind you.
Okay, well, we can do that after we
Okay.
run through and hear on the fiscal note.
Okay.
And that's, and I don't know if this is in the fiscal note, we can just wait, is the number that we normally get into the higher ed trust fund in the fiscal note?
Okay, so that's section 2 and 3. Just to bring it back to the bill, is this alteration of where some of this unclaimed property money is going with the sunset in 2040. So that's going to bring you to page 4. We're still within the unclaimed properties statutes here, and so this is where, going back to what I said a bit ago, this is about, if you look on line 19 there, this is about updating some of the thresholds that are in the statute to allow the treasurer's office to do a faster claims process when certain unclaimed property is coming in. So as you can see here on section 1553, person claiming to be the owner of the property has to file a claim, and the claimant has to verify the claim to its completeness and accuracy. That's on lines 11 and 12. And then the administrator can waive some of those requirements if, and then you're increasing the threshold down there under the subdivision 3, it's valued at less than 1,000. You have similar changes here on page 5 regarding when the claimant is deceased. So if the claimant is deceased and there's an open estate, this is on subdivision 1, open estate, they provide the unclaimed property to the administrator or the executor. In sub 2, if it's a closed estate and it's valued at the proposal is to increase from 5 to 10, you would distribute in accordance with the decree of distribution. If there's no open estate, no decree of distribution under sub 3, then it goes with the surviving spouse. So again, you've outlined in statute how these monies are disposed, and if it's below these thresholds, then there could be a faster process for getting that money back out the door. So same thing on page 6, top on line 2, and that's sub B, updating that threshold. So now we are moving into section 6 on page 6, and we're moving into out of the unclaimed properties to talk about the Vermont retirement systems. What you have here in section 6, the statutory language is being added to this on page 7. This allows the state treasurer to assess a penalty against political subdivisions that are participating in the state retirement system. So you have a few political subdivisions that do participate in the state system. If you remember, we talked about the law enforcement officers for a few of those towns and a bill just a few weeks ago. So for those municipalities, if they're not, providing their contribution from their due, current statute, the treasurer's office doesn't have any mechanism of assessing a penalty. And so this statutory section would authorize them to do so. Okay, next, section 7 is the creation of a pension and benefits funding task force. So this section has a lot of the just standard boilerplate language that we utilize when creating a task force. But it would, there on lines 13, kind of the operative language, it would review and report on the funding methodologies of their Vermont state retirement systems, including the post-employment benefit systems for both the state and the teachers' retirement programs.
Yeah, we heard of it.
Yep. You have membership here, like I said, a lot of the boilerplate. I will defer to my counterpart with Joint Fiscal Office to, walk you through why this is important at this point in time.
Yeah.
This did come with, I believe it was a $75,000 appropriation, which, was took out on the House side and moved to the budget process.
Yeah.
You may have already walked through this.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we get to, for the next section, we're gonna be on page 11. And so here's where I was going to pause and say that everything between pages 11 and 33 are striking statutory language in one section and moving the language over into another section within Title 3 or Title 16. What these sections are doing is for the state and teachers other post-employment benefit trust funds, their OPEB benefits, it is taking them out of the kind of sole administrative and fiduciary responsibility under the state treasurer and moving that administrative and fiduciary responsibility over to the Vermont Pension Investment Commission.
So we have that in the budget language as well. Do we want to replace it?
Chris from Joint Fiscal, this is the language that accompanies the budget, the numbers you all passed out in the budget transact this.
Okay, isn't there some language too about this, I guess?
There's always standard explanatory language that breaks down the retirement approach, but that's separate from this.
Okay.
But the budget you all did accommodates these proposed changes.
Okay.
And like I said, there's no, other than some, minor technical language that has to be added in to accomplish the goal. There's nothing that's actually being removed and not being replaced under the VPIC chapter. So part of this is moving the administration over and then just consolidating language out of the state retirement system or teachers retirement system related to these benefits and, putting it over into the VPIC chapter.
Okay.
So that's going to move you to page 33. These next few sections, the next two sections are about elective credits for individuals participating in the teachers' retirement system or the municipal retirement system. And what the language would do is here on the bottom of page 33, a member, line 19, a member, and this is in the municipal section, a member who is elected to serve as the president of an employee organization that is designated as the exclusive bargaining representative for employees of that organization. If the member becomes president of that bargaining organization, they can use those years serving as the president as credit served towards their retirement, as long as that organization pays the costs into the state retirement system. So it's intended to be kind of cost neutral. And as long as that employee organization is paying the contributions necessary, then the member who is serving as the president for that bargaining unit can use those years served as credits to their retirement. And this would be for teachers and for municipal, as I mentioned. And then you get to section 23 on the bottom of page 34. There is very minor changes in the information that the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee has to include in their annual report to the General Assembly. And I would characterize these changes as technical and not substantive.
Okay.
So currently, under this sub D, within the report, the committee is allowed to include other metrics at the committee's discretion, and they're removing that discretion, or this language would be removing that discretion, and saying they can only include other metrics adopted by recognized bond agencies. And this is at the committee's request to remove their discretion there. Similarly, on page 36, instead of including information on capital asset depreciation ratio reflecting unfunded capital maintenance costs, instead they include information on measures reflecting the remaining useful life of state infrastructure and potential future capital maintenance or replacement costs. I don't see those two things as being anything other than rewording the words in the sentence, so. Okay, then, let me pull up quickly the amendment from the finance committee.
Oh, this is wait. Is this? This is the finance committee.
Yes, it was offered by Senator Hardy, and then the committee adopted it. So it is just adding a section 24A, so adding a section at the very end of the bill regarding the Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund, and it requires a report from the state treasurer. A report from the state treasurer that has to look at mechanisms, including requiring consultation with the Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund Council for ensuring appropriate fiduciary oversight of the use of the fund to ensure that the endowed funds, including principal and interest earnings, are available for the intended purpose of providing scholarships to Vermont students. How to expand or modify the membership of the council to include student representatives, and how to expand the scope of scholarship awards, including award amounts, types of degrees covered, and institutions of higher education included in the scholarship program. This is a report that has to be submitted by January 15th, 2027 from the state treasurer. And there in subsection C, it requires the treasurer in developing said report has to consult with the Higher Education and Trust Fund Council and has to consult with respective student government associations of the institutions that are provided scholarships through the fund.
Now, institutions within the Vermont State College system, would that be CCB? Would it be anybody?
CCB is under the Vermont State College system, but the choice was to call them out directly. I believe there is one other in the Vermont State College system, blanking the name on the top of my head.
I mean, there used to be the different college, but they're all.
It's the Vermont State
University.
Thank you.
It's
So I was thinking, yes.
They're all part of the Vermont State College system. That's the Vermont State University. Is that the right name? I guess it's what I'm saying.
Yes,
It's the
you.
Vermont State University.
So is the Vermont State University part of the Vermont State College system?
That's-
Vermont State College is the step umbrella,
Yeah,
and then there's CCV and Vermont State University.
and
Okay.
it used to be.
So if you would say the other institutions within the Vermont State College system, that would be the university. There'd just be one, it would be the Vermont State University.
So initially it said the University of Vermont and the Vermont State Colleges system, because the Vermont State Colleges system would include both the Community College of Vermont and Vermont State College, but the sponsor wanted to call out CCP specifically. And so
So when you say the other institutions, plural, within the Vermont State College system, there are plural.
it could be the other institution within the Vermont State Colleges system.
I wanted to make sure they weren't saying like, go to the old institutions, like go to Johnson, go to Castleton, those institutions. Assume that's not.
Potentially defer to the sponsor and
I know we're gonna get there, and it should be occasional, but I would say if you're going to make the treasurer and then you go through all of this, why wouldn't you say that management of the 300,000 is being taken out between now and 2040? That within the budget presentation of the treasurer's office, that they would highlight what they're using the money for.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about that. Because that's separate than that.
But it's in the same vein.
Yeah, this is a report about the trust fund. But yeah, you could include.
This is all reporting really of how money's being used. And
This is more about the structure of the trust fund and how the trust fund is, like should there be recommendations on how to change the structure?
There was an initial amendment that required there to be a consultation with the council prior to any alteration of the use of the funds from its statutory purpose. We had discussion about that in the committee about, that being somewhat non-binding on you all as body. And I think there was some concern about making some of those changes. It also, I think, required a student representative on the council. And I believe there was one other change in the amendment initially.
So instead of requiring a treasurer just reports on.
And so there was pushback on making that change. And so they decided to create a report instead for the information.
Okay. Any other questions for Chairman?
And then I didn't walk through it, but effective July 1, 2026, except for the task force that would be reviewing the, current health, if you will, of your retirement systems, that would be effective immediately so that entity can begin its work. And then the sunset in 2040 for the diminution of the unclaimed properties money the Vermont saves back to higher education. And now,
And in there, it says who gets appointed to that.
yes, sir. It has a membership list.
Task force list, chair. There has to be communications.
Yeah, Chair of House Committee on Appropriations, Chair of the Senate Committee on Appropriations, Secretary of Administration, State Treasurer, one member appointed by Vermont National Education Association, one member appointed by the Vermont State Employees Association, and one member appointed by the President of the Vermont Troopers Association.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes.
Not necessarily a question for, Ledge Council, but my initial problem with this is that it's directing, if I'm reading it correctly, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like between now and 2040, there would be about $4 million that wouldn't make its way into the higher ed trust fund, would be diverted for another purpose. We already have a budget proposal out that is relatively complicated. I think just okaying this weakens our bargaining position because the House could easily say, you just okayed 4 million coming out for something else. So I guess I know it's a larger bill, but those pieces I wouldn't want to pass until we understand what the House's thinking is on the higher ed trust fund, the proposal that we have on.
When this passed the House, how did they didn't address that issue?
No, sir, and I don't want to say, Mr. Burton, that you're wrong, but I may defer to my counterpart in JFO to make sure.
I'm just looking at the memo where it says these sections would redirect up to $300,000 annually from the trust fund to the retirement security.
Yes, sir. So from the higher education and down the trust fund over to the Vermont Saves Admin.
And then I'm not a math major, I'm an English guy, but I think that's 4 million.
And that's if the treasurer says they don't, they need the money to administer the savings, but that's an if.
Right.
We're
authorizing that much.
But that's all up to the treasurer to make that decision.
Right.
Okay, so we can switch seats with JFO. Mr. Root can walk us through the fiscal note, and then we can have the treasurer, deputy treasurer, give us a description of it.
Good afternoon, Senators, Chris Root, Joint Fiscal. I'm going to try to be brief. So there's some time for the Deputy Treasurer to get into the weeds with, the why for some of these proposals and answer some of your questions. But I'll go through the fiscal note real quick and try to hit some of the questions that were raised. Bottom line up front before I start is, this bill does not require this committee to find more money. In your enduring wisdom, you passed a budget that sort of contemplated some of these things would happen. It's just taken a little while for the bill to make all the stops and end up in your room. But the provisions, I think Cam did an excellent job going through these. I'm gonna really just focus on the things that involve money. I'll start with the sections about the unclaimed property and Vermont Saves. Under current law, unclaimed property that is under $100 and over 10 years old is swept into the higher ed trust fund. And this is a very, very small amount of money to the higher ed trust fund. In FY25, a record amount of just shy of $148,000 went into the trust fund from this source. There is a table in here, table 1 on page 3, that shows you what the recent contributions have been to the higher ed trust fund from this source and what those contributions would have been had that threshold been at $150 instead of at $100, which is what's being proposed. So you can see here that raising that threshold from $100 to $150 on that older unclaimed property frees up a lot more money that would be available for transfer into the higher ed trust fund. I'm going to go back up here and try to address one of the questions that the Pro Tem had mentioned that, I think the proposal here is, you all are familiar with Vermont Saves. You created it a few years ago. That program is still scaling up to the point where it's not yet fully self-sufficient from program fee revenue and from the amount of, accounts and assets under management. As that program continues to grow with more assets under management and more participating accounts, it is expected that that program will reach financial self-sufficiency much sooner than the 2040 deadline that is in the bill. I put figure 1 and figure 2 here to try to illustrate what some of the treasurer's modeling has shown. But I just want to say, when I go into this, that I think the proposal that's before you is likely going to generate more money over time to the higher ed trust fund than under current law. And that is because of the impact of raising the threshold from $100 to $150. And also the fact that even though the law has that 2040 sunset, realistically, the treasurer's office expects that by 2033, Vermont Saves is not going to require any of this money, and that the full $300,000 would be available to go into the higher ed trust fund. So that's what you see in figure 2 there is the, we keep that, all the bars are set at 300,000, but over time, the amount of that 300,000 required for Vermont Saves will go down. And the remaining difference up to that 300,000 would be available for the higher ed trust. Are there any questions on that?
It could be higher than 300, but that's just the way.
There could be more money available from that threshold,
Right.
By going up to 150, that could sweep in more than $300,000 through the math.
Right.
But this just says you can only transfer up to $300,000. So that puts a limit on, if you were to change this right away, you'd have this big bubble of like older unclaimed property that would be like immediately eligible for the sweep. So this puts a cap on it. So there's not like a big chunk of money creating this lumpiness going through the system.
Okay.
Let me ask.
Sorry, Wes.
So, and under this model, 2033 comes, they may, no one says anything, no one does anything. The 300,000 could continue to go on into the future.
Into the higher ed trust fund, up to.
No, but the 300 is going into Vermont Saves. We go out to 2033, nobody says anything, the treasurer's office doesn't do anything. Just looking at it to say that 300 should
Right. The question, Vermont Saves would not get up to 300,000 in perpetuity because of the 2040 sunset in this.
I understand that.
But it would be something that the legislature would have to look at and the treasurer's
I'm
office.
gonna remember in 2033.
No, and I agree, if the projection is 2032, I'm looking at your bars, why are we adding an additional 8 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would defer to the treasurer's office on that since it's their proposal. And I would also just remind the committee that, in addition to their regular budget process, the treasurer's office does produce an annual report that's submitted to the legislature. So there may be avenues that the legislature could use to get at the information on an ongoing basis to monitor this moving forward.
I would just go back to the earlier point. We put a budget into conference that is intimately concerned with the higher ed trust fund. And the objection from the other side is that we are diverting money and not letting it go to the corpus of the fund. This is their bill. It's doing the same thing for a different reason. So I think that points out that they're okay when they do it, but not necessarily when we do it. But putting that aside, it weakens our bargaining position to okay this bill and have it go forward because the projections then are used against us. The legislature has already okayed so much being diverted. And ironically, it's a House bill. I would imagine the House would use it against us in the conference on the budget.
Or the amount of money available on the trust fund.
Right. So speaking for myself, I would, I would hope we could pull the section that does that, or we could delay moving the bill until our conference committee comes to an agreement. Higher trust.
Yeah, and before I move on, I would just mention, your point is well taken, Senator Ruth. I would just mention to the committee that although this is all involving the higher ed trust fund, which I don't know if any of us thought we'd be talking about the higher ed trust fund as much this session as we have. I just want to just remind everybody that this proposal doesn't speak to the principle of the fund. It speaks to on future revenues in the fund. So, it is semantics, but it's fiscally slightly different. I'm going to move on to other sections. If that's all right, I can finish this up real quick.
And I need to go for a meeting, but we won't. Great, thank you.
The part of the bill that I'm personally most excited about, and I know you are too, Mr. Chair, since you're implicated, is Section 7. You all will remember that a few years ago, in 2021, there was a much broader pension task force that really looked at a lot of things about the pension systems. And the result of that work was Act 114 of 2022. The thing that group was explicitly not asked to look at was the amortization and funding policies for the unfunded liabilities. What this proposes is sort of a skinny down version of a similar type of task force with legislative and labor representation to look at that piece that the last task force did not look at, which is the amortization and funding policies for the retirement systems. And why this matters is right now, the two retirement systems are on a closed single layer where the unfunded liabilities are to be fully amortized by 2038. 2038 sounds far away. It's not that far away. As you start getting closer to that time, the volatility risk in our funding requirements goes up if something happens in the years between now and 2038. So just by way of example, if the economy were to really tank in like FY33, the impact of that wouldn't start showing up in our amortization payments till FY35. So you have very, very few years to address that impact. And if the closer you get to 2038, the more significant the budget risk is of having a really, really wild increase in your contributions in response to something happening. This is a good time to start having a conversation with everybody and all the stakeholders to think about
what, should the future amortization policies look like? Not only in the event of something, really unprecedented happening, but, what does life after 2038 look like? Because systems just always, you never stay at 100% funded all the time because like experience and your long-term assumptions just don't always match up perfectly from year to year. So there are other options out there. We could, for example, go to closed layers where every year is amortized on its own layer, rather than everything on one single layer. But this group will be looking at that. And you all had appropriated $75,000 in the budget as a one-time to fund actuarial work for this task force. So that's accommodated already. The transitioning OPEB fiduciary oversight to BPIC, a lot of words here just to say you all commissioned a report from the treasurer's office a few years ago to look at OPEB governance. The primary recommendation that came out of that report was moving OPEB away from the sole fiduciary model that's currently in place and treating it more like we currently treat the three major pension systems, where BPIC is the fiduciary. So this language essentially accomplishes all that statutory cleanup. You all had already approved in the budget the mechanical changes needed to move some of the costs from the treasurer's office over to BPIC. The sections 21 and 22 have no fiscal impact. These deal with allowing for the president of a labor union to buy a year of service credit. Should they be not teaching an active service because they're serving as the union president for that year. So we have similar service credit purchases already in place in statute for Peace Corps, military service, some other things like that. This would require that if you want to buy that year while you're not teaching and you're instead serving as a labor union president, that you purchase the actuarial equivalents of that year of service.
So if you're serving as a state senator.
I don't think
Not better
you don't get to, you don't get entitled to a benefit for your service as a state.
You don't make enough to buy in.
Well, I'm not in the teacher's retirement program.
Yeah, but you don't make enough to buy in anything here.
It's never too late for a career change.
Yeah.
And then the last piece I just mentioned was the higher ed trust fund report that you already went through. I just wanted to flag for you that there is another reporting requirement that you all put in the budget about the higher ed trust fund. It is slightly different in
Yeah.
its scope.
I know that.
So that's the fiscal note.
Treasurer's gonna be busy talking about the higher ed. Okay, any questions for Mr. Roop on the fiscal note? If not, I'll invite the deputy treasurer to give us a little more explanation from the treasurer's office point of view on the Vermont saves and the Jackline property and diversion for the higher down trust fund.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the record, Deputy Treasurer, Dave Chair. Have a quick presentation to
Real quick, but so you probably didn't send this. Have you sent this to?
I have not had a chance to.
Just, you can do it afterwards, so we can
Okay,
get it
my
on.
apologies. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if I was. gonna-
Yeah, no, we didn't.
So I wanted to, go over the key issue that I think this committee is concerned with, and hopefully I'll have a chance to connect with Senator Baruch as well. I think two things to note really quickly with respect to that question about, the House Appropriations Committee and their view of the bill versus, the other big proposal about the Higher Education Trust Fund. Our understanding of their view, and if we share this view, is that the significant difference and notable difference is in fact that this proposal does not propose to remove any money from the body of the Higher Education Trust Fund. It's just about contributions to the fund. And in no year under this proposal would there be zero contributions. There would be a temporary dip, and over the life of the proposal, the Higher Ed Trust Fund would be better off. But it does not draw from the corpus of the fund, and I think the House Appropriations Committee viewed that as a significant difference, and as a result, voted unanimously in favor of this. So let me go over really quickly the basic concept here. About the property transfer, the point here is to fund the BT saves to self-sufficiency. Where are we on BT saves? It's been in place for about 16 months. Just want to give this background here to let folks know it's going and going well. Went from, in those 16 months, went from 0 accounts to more than 6,000 accounts under management, from $0 to more than $7 million under management. And, just note that we approach this program and how we do things in the office generally with always trying to find the win-win initiatives that have a high impact on Vermonters while keeping costs low. We think that's true of the program, BT Saves as a whole, and we think it's true of this proposed solution.
How many accounts do you think you need for it to be covered? So
At around, I believe at around 20,000, you start to see that's when we're approaching the crossover. And so you'll see that as we go through the slides, I will also submit those projections in full with all the revenue assumptions to the committee assistant for this committee to review. We do have the numbers to add all those estimates that incorporate the fee structure that we use with this. And I will also note that the initial request for funding for BT Saves was far below what any other state that's doing this program requested. And so we are implementing this program much less expensively to the Vermont taxpayer than any other state that's doing the same thing. We did, it's not just us making these assurances. We did check with stakeholders on this, the beneficiaries of the plan, the institutional beneficiaries have no objection to this proposal. They have no issue with it, again, because there is no pullback from the fund and ultimately it does benefit the fund. It's fair to say there's been questions about this provision in every committee that's reviewed it. Ultimately, each of the committees did pass this bill unanimously, including the full House on a voice vote. Why did it ultimately receive that support? Well, I can give you a quick explanation here. The proposal is going to do three things. It's going to fund the Vermont Saves program until it reaches self-sufficiency. It's going to do so without impacting the general fund. It's going to provide greater revenue to the higher education endowment trust fund than under current law. So it's a win-win-win. How does it do that? You've already heard it reconfigures an existing transfer to include a sort of waterfall stop at what is called the Vermont Retirement Security Fund, which is really just the name we use for the account that funds the BT Saves program. Again, I don't want to belabor what you already know. This just summarizes the current state of the transfer. Anything more than 10 years old, under $100, gets transferred to the higher education endowment trust fund. The scale of these contributions is really fairly small in the context of the overall fund. The real driver of the increase to the body of the fund is the estate tax windfalls that we see every few years. The change that we're proposing is to raise the level of that transfer from everything under $100 and more than 10 years old, $50 and 10 years old, and that does have a real change in the revenues, but there is this $300,000 cap in order to keep everything smooth and not volatile. We don't want to have one big sweep or have sort of unpredictable outcomes. So here's where we get into the projections. You can see,
which is the same tables that were in the fiscal note.
That's exactly right. And appreciate JFO for doing great work on generating these charts. The numbers are all based on the projections that I just spoke about. So you can see in no year our allocations to the higher education trust fund eliminated. Over time, they will exceed, within 2 years, by FY29, the amount of money going to the higher education trust fund will be higher than it has ever been in any year previously. The highest year that we've ever had of the transfer to the higher ed trust fund under this transfer is about $147,000. That was the most recent fiscal year. By FY29, you can see that we're already at 161 and it goes up from there.
Why do you think in FY27 that it would be $12,300?
What's that?
Why in FY27 do you not think that the retirement security fund would get the full $300,000?
Because we already have the assets under management that I discussed a few slides ago. We have those 6,000 accounts at $7 million under management. The way the fees work, we get a fee per, I should say a share.
This is about the transfer. So would you get more unclaimed property based on that table? Again, FY25, it was under 50, there was 342,000 available basically. And so when if you have a 300, when 300 of the 342 move over to the saves, BP safe.
So the cap is up 300 and we're saying that we expect that Vermont Retirement Security Fund, saves, will need 242.
So you'll just take 242. You won't take the whole three. You could take 300, but you'll only take.
That's correct. We're only the intention of the plan here is to only take as much as we need to fund the
On
Vermont
the fees.
Saves program and to fill the gap if the fees have not yet closed. Each year, that gap will get smaller as more accounts come in and more assets are under management. And so FY 27, we anticipate a need of 242. FY 28, we anticipate a need of 203. You can see it drops from
Are
there.
you limited what you can spend the money in the Vermont Retirement Security Fund for?
It is just to fund the VT Saves program, the administrative costs of the VT Saves program. That's all that is statutory.
You couldn't move the money somewhere else or just spend it on operations.
Yeah.
How do we know if you're entitled to take 300 and 300 is held? Or what reporting mechanism is there to the legislature to say that, that it is a lower number?
So there's two ways. One is that there's a report that we submit every year about the Higher Education Trust Fund that includes the information about this transfer. And two, there's also a report that we're required to submit about the VT Saves program. This most recent year, it was within the Treasurer's annual report. And so two different reports that go to the legislature each year will have that information and will provide a mechanism for you all to check and make sure that we are doing what we said we would do and what we anticipate, and what happens will be what we anticipate happening.
Second question related to that, why if this is in 2032, your estimates are, why would we go up to 2040?
But that's a fair question. I think the thinking was just an abundance of caution. We don't anticipate that it will take that long. And ultimately, we felt like no harm done because the Higher Education Trust Fund is getting everything through those years, through those latter years, and they'll ultimately benefit significantly from that. And so I do want to note that if this proposal had been in place over the prior 5 years, it's really a significant benefit to the Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund. They did receive over the last 5 years, you can see 623, almost 624,000. If this proposal had been in place, they would have received 1.46 million. That's a 43% increase, more than $800,000 more. So this really is, these are numbers we know, these aren't projections. This is what would have happened had this been in place. So it really is a significant benefit to the Higher Education Trust Fund. Looking at the projections, over the subsequent 5 years, VT Saves will receive $706,000, whereas over the lifetime of this proposal, the trust fund will receive more than $3 billion. Even if you just reduce that projection to the 5 years in which VT Saves is getting some revenue to meet its needs, you're still looking at the Higher Ed Trust Fund getting $1 million. So really a greater benefit to the Higher Education Trust Fund. Here's a chart just showing the impact on the Higher Education Trust Fund transfers. You can see that by FY, as I already mentioned, by FY 29, we'll already exceed the highest transfer that's ever gone to the Higher Education Trust Fund. And it keeps going up from there.
Well, that's pretty easy to understand. It's really the question about the transfer to the Vermont Saves, not that if it changed the dollar amount, there won't be more money going to the Higher Trust Fund.
Right, right.
So we need to move on. Do you have any last statements you want to make?
Just the final note that you guys know perfectly well how the Higher Education Trust Fund operates. I won't belabor that. But just noting that I think part of the reason the beneficiaries were not particularly concerned about a temporary drop in how much was going to go to the body of the fund, again, nothing's coming out of the fund, is that the amount that the unclaimed property transfers add to the principal simply aren't that big compared to the body of the fund. So this is how much is being added to the total principal, less than 0.5% over the last 5 years. The difference we're looking at, with our proposal versus without our proposal in FY 27, it's, a reduction of 0.24% in terms of how much is going to the body of the fund. FY 28.09, it's very small reductions. The beneficiaries weren't concerned about a temporary reduction. when what they're looking at over the lifetime or the duration of this is an annual contribution that increases the value of the fund by 5%, at least calculated in the fund law.
So remind me who manages the trust fund, the corpus of the trust?
There is, yes, there is a committee that oversees it. I should say financially speaking, the treasurer is the entity that holds that fund.
And investment.
And
I decide where to cut it. Okay, that's all I was gonna remember.
yeah,
I'm on the council, so I should know, but I couldn't remember who was the one making the investments.
that's right. The treasurer's office does that, and it is folded into a larger fund called the trust investment account, which within that fund, there's a number of different funds that are pooled in order to build the assets.
Okay. I think we have enough information. Any other questions from the deputy treasurer? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have Ledge Council for our next bill, so we're gonna skip over this for now, so we can move on to 578, the accrual. Is that last word? Penalty.
Penalties.
That's a fusion session. Yes, Senator Watson, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. Still wondering about buying that year that you're in the Senate for your retirement?
Oh, that's all resolved. I had worked that out previously, but I'm not the union president, so
You could make an amendment to the thing.
Yeah. expand it slightly.
Okay. Counselor, what should we know about H 570?
All right, for the record, Hillary Cheddar Ames, off the Legislative Council. Switching gears a little bit, H 578 is about animal cruelty offenses, penalties and procedures. So there are a number of animal cruelty offenses in Title 13. The state can pursue criminal proceedings against the animal owner. The state can also pursue civil forfeiture proceedings to take an animal subject to cruelty away from the owner. H 578 has money flowing related to the cost of care for animals while civil forfeiture proceedings are ongoing. And so that money flow is, I think, why this bill is in this committee. So more specifically, humane officers can seize animals where they have probable cause to believe that the animals are subject to cruelty. The state can then pursue the civil forfeiture proceedings that I mentioned. While civil forfeiture proceedings are ongoing, rescues or shelters take care of the animals and incur costs to take care of the animals. So H 578 requires owners to post security that would cover the cost of food and necessary vet care for those animals. That money is collected by the court and then gets transferred to the Animal Welfare Fund. The director of animal welfare can then reimburse those rescues or shelters based on proof of what they've spent caring for those animals while the civil forfeiture proceedings are ongoing. There are two other notes related to security and payment debit that are relevant. One is that the owner can request a financial hardship waiver. So there's a due process issue with requiring someone to pay money to access a court proceeding. So if the owner cannot afford the security, they can request a waiver, a reduction or a full waiver. Kind of corollary to that is that when the director of animal welfare is paying out reimbursement money for cost of care to shelters or organizations, the director can only pay up to the amount of the security that is coming into the fund. So if security is not coming from the owner because of financial hardship or otherwise, the money is not available in the fund that get paid out. I think the idea based on testimony was that this is still an improvement on what happens currently, which is that there isn't money at all available. So that at least the idea of posting a security presents the opportunity for some money to be coming in and then available to pay costs of care to the rescues and shelters caring for animals during civil forfeiture proceedings. It's a 550-foot view. Happy to answer any other questions.
Yeah, so there's no fiscal note because it's such a tiny amount, less than de minimis, some would say. Any questions about this? Does this cover You probably said during your run over, like if there's, if you just related farm, all animals are part of that, right? So
So,
it's only
animals,
for animal cruelty. So it's not just like
Exactly.
loose animals, because there's issues in the statute that if an animal gets loose and then you have to hold it, who pays for its care or what, but that's totally different.
that is separate. This is an animal seized because of an animal cruelty offense that's defined in the statute.
Does anybody else have any questions? Now we entertain a motion to move in favor of this. So move. Further comments, the clerk will call the roll. Yes. Senator Baru. Senator Brett, yes. Senator Lyons. Senator Norris. Yep. Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Westman. Yep. Senator Birchley. Yes. Yeah, we'll hold it open to the fact that I don't think they can be offended if they're not, if they're listed, so be it. Okay. Who's the animal activist in the room? That's
I'll do it.
okay.
I mean, let's use it.
Why did you think Norris about it? You don't think he's?
You wanna do it?
like-
Oh, no, just leave me right out.
I reported the.
It's less than de minimis.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
It's
there's
a
nothing
sponsor.
significant in here. Well, you might be at 20 horses, every 30 days.
Is there a Senate version of this bill?
Sorry?
There's not a Senate version.
No, but I sponsored the animal cruelty bill.
Oh.
Last meeting.
So it's
I
only.
feel a little watered down.
Dr. Watson gets it.
Yeah. Okay, there's a better Watson, will be the report.
True.
You can yield, you can report the first part, you can yield.
So you say it's less than, like I said, de minimis.
Yes. Sure. Okay, well, Watson as the. Okay, great, succeeded, so, thank you. Late breaking news is that we're going to take up S 740, so we can get that done. But the good news is, that means that we will less to do, right?
That's, we're gonna be here for.
Well, some people won't be, but, so
And I don't object to you taking it up.
you don't.
I'm not here.
Oh, well, okay. Can we get that?
Should be able to, but maybe we should take a break when she gets here.
Yes, we will
What
adjourn
is
for,
740?
we'll take a 5-minute break or 10-minute break.